Before we move to the matters at hand, I want to briefly address the big issue that's foremost in my mind, and I'm sure in the minds of my colleagues, Libya. The President has an obligation to clearly explain to Congress and the American people what his administration's objectives and strategy are for our operations in Libya. He fulfilled this obligation in part on Monday night, but the full House will not have an opportunity to be briefed until this afternoon, 12 days after the start of Operation Odyssey Dawn. This committee will follow that up with a hearing tomorrow focused on Libya with Secretary Gates and Admiral Mullen. Admiral Stavridis, in his role as NATO's Supreme Allied Commander Europe, is intimately involved in the campaign against the Gaddafi regime, particularly as command of the operation transitions to NATO. Admiral, we're certainly interested in your views, particularly as NATO assumes command of the military mission today, but I plan on reserving my questions on operations in Libya, and there are many, for this afternoon's and tomorrow's briefings. Moving to the reason we're here today, Admiral Stavridis, I am concerned that the administration will seek to remove one or more Army Brigade combat teams, or BCTs, from Europe for the sake of efficiencies that neglect the operational importance of their mission. I also want to highlight my concerns regarding the European phased adaptive approach. Missile defense is becoming a critical component of our relationship to our European allies, and we must ensure Eucom has the resources and flexibility to implement a robust defense. Moving to SOUTHCOM, General Fraser, in my mind, the illicit trafficking threat is the greatest challenge we face in your geographic area of responsibility. It's also, I should add, one that requires close collaboration and coordination with your colleague at the table from Northcom, as well as your interagency partners. General Fraser, your written statement highlights opportunities and challenges resulting from the activities of extra-regional actors in SOUTHCOM's area of responsibility. China, Russia, and Iran have been very active in Latin America through arms sales, personnel exchanges, investments, and trade deals. In addition, the activities of Hezbollah in the region are very troubling. The committee would benefit from your assessment of trends in the activities and influence of foreign actors in the Western Hemisphere. Regarding Northcom, drug-related violence is one of the foremost national security challenges directly impacting the U.S. homeland, and we need to treat it as such. I laud the heroic efforts of Mexican security service personnel and their public officials who, and make no mistake about this, are risking their lives and the lives of their families in a war against these brutal criminal enterprises. We need to support these heroes in this fight while fully respecting the sovereignty of Mexico. I look forward to hearing your assessment, Admiral, on the progress that's being made by the Mexican authorities and what Northcom is doing to support them and build their capacity and capabilities. Finally, the fiscal year 2011 continuing resolution has resulted in the Missile Defense Agency spending $324 million less than it anticipated for this fiscal year. Next fiscal year's request reduces the ground-based mid-course defense program by another $185 million. These are sizable cuts, and we must understand how these cuts impact homeland missile defense effectiveness, modernization, operations, and development. Gentlemen, again, thank you for appearing before us here today. Ranking Member Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to join you in welcoming Admiral Winnefeld, General Fraser, and Admiral Stavridis here. Appreciate your gentlemen's service and your presence today. My statement will be brief. I agree substantially with the issues that the Chairman has raised and the ones we wish to hear in all three of your different commands. Obviously, in Southern Command, we're interested in the drug trafficking, how things have progressed from Colombia and beyond, other issues, Northcom, your work with Mexico on similar issues, getting an update on that would be important. And Libya is the issue that is on all of our minds, which I'm sure you'll hear a great deal. I was joking that General Fraser and Admiral Winnefeld, your you're a very lucky gentleman because most of the questions will be focused on Admiral Stavridis and take a little of the pressure off you, I suspect. But we'll try to keep you involved as well. And also with the European Command, we do not want to forget what's going on in Afghanistan, the role that NATO is playing there. I'll be very curious to hear the Admiral's views on how that is progressing, how the support from our NATO allies is going in Afghanistan, and where he sees that situation going. And lastly, one issue that had not been raised and I think is particularly important in Europe is the relationship there with Russia and with Turkey, the role those two countries play, and how our relationship with each of them is going. So I'd be curious to hear about that a little bit. With that, I have a statement for the record that is more detailed, which I will submit, but I will yield back and look forward to your testimony.
Thank you. We'll follow in order I introduced Admiral Stavridis, General Fraser, and Admiral Winnefeld.
Chairman, Ranking Member, thank you very much to all the members of the committee for offering us an opportunity to come and talk with you about all the important issues that were raised, and I'm sure many others. I do have to point out, if you get confused at any point in the hearing who the two fighter pilots at the table are, they're the two tall gentlemen with full heads of hair. And of course, I look at them both as potential donors in that regard. But it's a pleasure to be here with two very distinguished colleagues who are also very good friends. I would, if I may, make the observation that when I first came before this committee 5 years ago, I started to get to know Rep. Gabby Giffords, and I just wanted to comment that she's, during my time at SOUTHCOM, was a true friend, and certainly all of us are thinking about her. Today, as always, it's a pleasure to be with you. As I mentioned, I do have a full statement for the record. If that could be entered, sir, I'd appreciate it. What I'd like to talk about very briefly are three key things that U.S. European Command is focused on in sort of a general sense. One is military operations, one is partnering with our friends and allies, and the third is engaging with the interagency. In terms of military operations, if I could, I'll start with just a word about Afghanistan. And I'll do this from my perspective as U.S. European Command Commander and make the point that today in Afghanistan we have about 98,000 U.S. troops. We have 45,000 non-U.S. troops in Afghanistan fighting alongside of us. The vast majority, well over 80%, are from the European theater. We also have from U.S. European Command 12,000 of our U.S. soldiers who are forward deployed from Europe into Afghanistan and into Iraq as well. So from a military operational perspective at U.S. European Command, we are very much in the operational mode as we support those kinds of operations forward. In terms of how I see Afghanistan, both the Chair and the Ranking Member mentioned this, I would say much as you heard from David Petraeus, I'm cautiously optimistic today about our progress. We have 49 troop contributing nations who stand with us. It's the largest coalition in modern history, perhaps in history. And today, I think we see steady progress in the security sector, and I would particularly point to gains in the South. While they are fragile, as General Petraeus has mentioned, I think that they are indicative of the very real possibility of our transition to Afghan-led security forces throughout Afghanistan by 2014. So from a U.S. European Command perspective, we'll continue to support that effort. And again, I would say cautious optimism is my watchword on Afghanistan. In terms of partnership with friends and allies, there are 51 nations with whom we have mill-to-mill, military-to-military relationships from U.S. European Command. And just as one example, last year we conducted 33 exercises, 50,000 people involved. And these exercises are the component that allows us to bring these friends and allies forward into real operations with us. The interaction, the training, the coalition building that occurs as part of these partnerships, I believe, is fundamentally why we have 45,000 non-U.S. troops with us in Afghanistan today. And I know my geographic colleagues here would echo that building those kind of relationships are part of conducting successful coalition operations today. And then thirdly, I mentioned the interagency. At U.S. European Command, we tried very hard to support the Department of State as they do diplomacy, to support AID as they do development. We want to be a good interagency partner. Two quick examples. One is disaster response. Last year, we were working to alleviate problems from wildfires, both in Russia and in Israel. And this is an example of working with AID in that case. Another partner is the Drug Enforcement Administration. We have a counter-trafficking center. It's a very reduced version of what General Fraser operates out of Geatif South and Key West to try and get at some of these trafficking challenges as they move through our region and come back to threaten the United States. So those three things are the key areas in which we're engaged at the moment. As well, we are looking at ballistic missile threat and what we can do to develop the phased adaptive approach. We're looking at relations with Russia. We're looking at Israel and Turkey, important countries in our region. And we're also thinking about cyber and terrorism. So it's a very full plate for us at U.S. European Command. I'll close, Chairman and Ranking Member, with just a word about Libya. One is administrative in a sense, to simply clarify my role in terms of operations in Libya. From a U.S. perspective, those are conducted by Africa Command, headed very ably by General Carter Ham, whom many of you know. My job from a U.S. perspective is to support General Ham and to move U.S. European Command forces forward for the coalition operations that have been conducted for the last 5 weeks. In my NATO hat, as the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, I'm essentially the operations officer for NATO. So in that hat, we are now taking on this mission in Libya as it is transitioning today with flights over Libya, with an air tasking order generated by NATO, and taking on the important missions that were outlined under the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1973. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, thank you for giving me an opportunity to lay out a few thoughts initially. I look forward to your questions. I'd like to close by saying thank you to the Congress and thank you to this committee for your support to all of our men and women. We could not operate a single day without the support of this committee, and I thank each one of you personally. Sir.
Thank you very much. And without objection, each of your full statements will be introduced into the record. General Fraser.
Chairman, thank you. Ranking Member Smith, thank you also, and distinguished members of the committee. It is my great pleasure and privilege to be here and have the opportunity to discuss United States Southern Command and our accomplishments over the past year, plus our future efforts in Latin America and the Caribbean. But first, before I continue, I'd like to, as Admiral Stavridis did, recognize the absence of Congresswoman Giffords from this committee. As Admiral Stavridis said, she has been a stalwart supporter of United States Southern Command, of Air Forces Southern, and we wish her a speedy recovery. I'm also pleased to have my wife with me today. She is a great partner. She is a steadfast advocate for our military families, and she is a remarkable representative of United States Southern Command and all our military spouses throughout our armed forces. I'm also pleased, as Admiral Stavridis mentioned, also to share a table with my friends and my counterparts. Admiral Stavridis, my predecessor, left a real legacy of interagency integration. He talked about that just a minute ago in European Command. That legacy remains in United States Southern Command and is a vital part of our organization. Admiral Winnefeld and I have been working diligently to coordinate our respective activities in Mexico and the Central American region, as well as across our combatant command boundaries, to ensure that there is no disconnect and there is no seam in U.S. military engagement within the hemisphere. Over the past year, United States Southern Command worked in close collaboration with other U.S. federal agencies and our international partners to respond to natural disasters like the earthquakes in Haiti and Chile, and to address the ongoing threats to regional security as well. This year, with the continued support of Congress, we will continue to promote United States national and regional security interests through enduring partnerships. Much as Admiral Stavridis mentioned, partnerships and the building of partnerships remains a vital part of our mission and a vital role that we continue to pursue throughout the region. But we're really focused on two direct issues, two direct challenges. One is the ever-present nature of natural disasters within the region, like those we witnessed last year. And then, Chairman, as you and the ranking member mentioned, the ongoing threat posed by transnational criminal organizations and the illicit activities they pursue. While we remain prepared to conduct humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operations whenever the need arises, transnational criminal organizations represent the evolving challenge to regional and hemispheric security. These transnational criminal organizations engage in illicit trafficking of drugs, arms, money, and people across the porous borders throughout the region into the United States and also abroad into Africa and into Europe. They do not respect national sovereignty, laws, governments, or human life. Nowhere is this more evident than in Central America, which is besieged by gangs and transnational criminal organizations who conduct illicit trafficking with near impunity. The direct result of their activity is unprecedented levels of violence and an erosion of citizen safety. The northern triangle of Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras is the deadliest zone in the world outside of war zones. The newly formed Central American Citizen Security Partnership announced by President Obama last week builds upon the existing interagency efforts and leverages the capacities of partners such as Canada, Colombia, and Mexico to help Central America respond to the challenges of organized crime, drug trafficking, and violence. U.S. Southern Command will continue to support this effort. In closing, I would also like to thank the committee for your support in funding the construction of our new headquarters in Miami. My good friend Admiral Stavridis had a large role to play in that, and we're the beneficiary of all his hard work as well as yours. This state-of-the-art building enhances our internal and external collaboration. It improves our ability to conduct interagency operations, and it raises the quality of life of our personnel. So on behalf of the men and women of the United States Southern Command, thank you for your support. And I'd also like to close by thanking Congress and the members of this committee for your continued support of our men and women in uniform. And much like Admiral Stavridis said, we could not do our job without your constant support. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, thank you for your continued support.
Thank you. Admiral Winnefeld.
Chairman McKeon, Ranking Member Smith, distinguished members of the Armed Services Committee, thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you this morning. I'll echo my colleagues on at least 2 points. One is that I'm delighted to be alongside these two fine gentlemen this morning, including my longtime friend, Admiral Jim Stavridis, and my very good friend and close partner, Doug Frazier, in the Western Hemisphere arena. I also like to echo their thoughts on the absence of Representative Gabrielle Giffords, who's been such a strong supporter of Northcom, and in particular NORAD and our air sovereignty mission. As the commander of U.S. Northcom, responsible for the defense of the United States, and in the case of NORAD, for the air defense of North America, it's my privilege to work with a talented team of men and women executing a uniquely diverse set of homeland defense, civil support, and security cooperation missions in Colorado Springs. Our daily efforts include countering terrorism and transnational criminal organizations, preparing to support our federal and state partners in the wake of a natural or man-made disaster, air defense against both external and internal threats, maritime and ballistic missile defense, and of course a growing focus on the Arctic. I'd like to highlight 2 of these areas in advance of our discussion this morning. First, the tragic events in Japan over the last several weeks highlight the importance of being prepared to respond to disasters, including those providing little or no notice, such as earthquakes, and those involving accidental or intentional release of harmful substances, as in Japan's case, the release of radionuclides. U.S. Northcom plays a key role in our nation's response to these disasters, principally in support of FEMA's role as the lead federal agency, providing support to the affected states by bringing either additional capacity or additional capabilities to bear that our partners may lack. Time is our enemy in these disasters, and we search every day for ways to become more agile to meet the needs of our partners. We also stress our supporting role in these disasters, and I'm pleased to be able to report to you that we've made considerable strides over the last year in achieving unity of command and control over state and federal military forces that might respond together in the wake of a disaster. I can also report that Northcom's relationship with the National Guard, who is such a capable partner and on whom I rely so much for my mission accomplishment in several key areas, is superb. The second area I'd like to highlight is U.S. Northcom's support to the ongoing struggle to disrupt and dismantle the transnational criminal organizations, otherwise known as TCOs, that are having such corrosive effects within our hemisphere. We work with law enforcement agencies within the United States and in conjunction with U.S. SOUTHCOM in support of the efforts of our partner nations in the hemisphere. President Obama and President Calderon of Mexico have underscored our shared responsibilities as nations. On the U.S. side of the border to reduce drug consumption and the illicit flow of arms and money, and on the Mexican side to interdict drugs going north and to strengthen the rule of law so that criminals are put and kept in jail. The Mexican government has displayed exemplary moral, physical, and political courage in undertaking this important struggle, as you pointed out, Chairman McKeon, because they know this is about the future of Mexico, and I take my hat off to them for this. The Mexican military has been asked by its civilian leadership to join with Mexican law enforcement agencies to support this struggle in the right way, respectful of Mexico's democratic ideals and the nation's commitment to the rule of law. It's been a difficult struggle, as you pointed out. Since December 2006, 35,000 Mexicans have lost their lives in TCO-related violence. The criminality extends far beyond drugs to extortion, robbery, kidnapping, and trafficking in persons. I salute Mexico's police and security forces for their courage, skill, and determination, and for the progress they've made in building institutions like the federal police, and in taking down over 24 of the most wanted criminals in their country, progress for which they do not always get the credit they deserve. Today, the Mexican military is confronting concurrent challenges: how to counter a sophisticated, unconventional threat by integrating intelligence and operations, how to work jointly with each other and with their interagency partners, and how to fully inculcate respect for human rights into every operation. We know this is hard because we've been down the same road, and in some ways we're still on the same road. So I tell my capable Mexican partners that we don't know it all, we've made our own mistakes along the way, and we seek the kind of engagement that helps them benefit from our experience. But while I always want to do more to help, I want to state publicly and very clearly that the first and most important principle we observe in this struggle is respect for Mexican sovereignty. We have much to offer, but Mexico is always, always in the lead in Mexico. The Mexican government has a strategy. They've defined with us a substantive framework to guide our cooperation, and they've invited us to work with them to support their efforts. But again, they're always in the lead in their country. If together we can maintain our resolve, if we can be responsive to their requests, if we can work effectively together to support their operational progress, and if we can continue to make progress on our own side of the border, then we have a good chance of carrying the day against the TCOs. And if not, the corrosive effects of the TCOs will continue to pose a danger to the citizens of both of our nations. I want to thank you, as my colleagues did, both the committee and a very capable staff, for your steadfast support for our men and women, both in uniform and in civilian clothes, who work hard on these and many other difficult problems every single day. Once again, thanks for the opportunity to appear today, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much. Admiral Stavridis, boy, oh boy. At last year's Eucom posture hearing, you strongly advocated for retaining 4 Army combat teams, or BCTs, in Europe. You said that all 4 BCTs are required to enable both rotations in support of overseas contingency operations and building partnership capacity activities with our European allies. The 2010 Quadrennial Defense Review backed you up on this, but that final decision would be made pending a review. What's the status of the review, and when will the decision be announced? And do you still strongly support retaining all 4 BCTs, and if not, what's changed, and what are the impacts if 1 or more BCTs is relocated?
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, to focus on what these BCTs do, Brigade Combat Teams, I think they fulfill essentially 4 key functions. They provide reassurance, they provide deterrence, they are essential in our training process that we spoke of with our partners and allies in Europe. And as we can see today, they are very engaged in operations. Again, 12,000 folks forward even as we speak. In terms of the review, it's still ongoing. I think it is coming to a conclusion soon. And it's not simply focused, sir, on the BCTs. It's really a larger look at the overall structure in Europe, which, as you know, has decreased dramatically since the Cold War, coming down from some 400,000 total troops to about 80,000 today, 75% decrease. So we will see, I think, the results of a final look, which is being conducted at this point. All the inputs are in, and I think final decisions will be announced, I would guess, soon. But I don't have visibility as to when that final decision would come. Overall, I'm satisfied that my input and my voice has been heard through the process, and I am confident that I will be supportive of the result that comes out when it is announced.
Thank you. General Fraser, China, Russia, and Iran have been extremely active in Latin America. Several left-leaning countries, such as Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Bolivia, have forged ties with the anti-U.S. leaders in Libya, North Korea, and elsewhere. Alarmingly, Hezbollah and other radical groups appear to have a growing presence in the region. How significant is the influence of non-Western Hemisphere actors in the region, and how would you assess our relationships in comparison? What can SOUTHCOM and its interagency partners do to maintain strong relationships in the region and counter foreign interferences?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We see a growing influence, but it varies country by country if you look at those external actors. But it's still primarily focused on political, diplomatic, commercial relationships within all those countries. And that is a normal international process, if you will, and that in many cases, especially as we look at China, is a two-way street, where countries within the region are also looking to engage with China on a more robust basis. Russia's focus primarily continues to be commercial and diplomatic, but there is also arms sales that they are continuing to pursue within the region. In most cases, that is providing opportunities for other countries as they look to modernize their forces within the region. My biggest concern within the arms supplies that Russia is providing is the number of automatic weapons being provided to Venezuela, and the potential that those could be used in other places. Not that there's a connection to Venezuela, it's just the fact that they could find their ways into other hands. Regarding Iran, very similar, if you will, primarily diplomatic and commercial, in many ways, from our assessment, looking to limit their isolation in the international community and also support anti-U.S. And reduce U.S. influence not only within the region but also in other parts of the globe. There is Hezbollah and Hamas do have organizations resident in the region. I have not seen them growing in any capacity, and I see primarily any support that they are giving is financial support, principally back to parent organizations in the Middle East. It is not. I have not seen connections that go beyond that to date. What are we doing about that? We continue to engage very robustly with our partner militaries throughout the region. We have very good military-to-military relations with all those partners within the region. The ones that we have minimal relations with today are primarily Venezuela and Bolivia, and that is more their choice than ours. We would like to continue to engage with them. They are choosing not to engage with us.
Thank you very much, and we're happy to have your wife here with you today. You're more than welcome. Thank you. Admiral Winnefeld, how are the Mexican security services doing in their fight against these viciously violent transnational communist or criminal organizations? What is the Northcom doing to support them and build their capacity and capabilities while maintaining an appropriate respect for our sovereign neighbor? Is there something more that this committee can do to help regarding either resources or statutory flexibility?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I would say that it's important to understand, as we all do, that the Mexican security services are up against a very sophisticated, very ruthless, and very well-financed threat, a series of threats, actually, several different organizations. I did a check recently, and I think most of the assessments are that about $40 billion flows across our border each year into Mexico to sustain these transnational criminal organizations. And even though they are not military forces, if you took that $40 billion and ranked it among the world's militaries, it would come in the top 10 for the amount of money that is potentially supplying these organizations. So it is a well-financed threat, largely by our drug demand in the United States. So the Mexican security forces, the security police, the military, are up against a very, very sophisticated and ruthless threat. I give them a great deal of credit, though, because they are undergoing some very difficult transformations. They've taken a force that was a very conventional force that candidly was mostly focused on support for natural disasters, and they are gradually transforming this, and I would say very successfully, into a force that's capable of very irregular operations against this sophisticated threat. It's a long journey. We've been on the same journey ourselves over the last 10 years, and it's difficult to transform, and they're doing a good job. I would say that they have had some serious successes in the last 16 months or so. They have taken down 28 of the major criminals, lead criminals, inside Mexico. Most recently, their takedown of some of the people who were involved in the murder of Agent Zapata down in Mexico was actually a very sophisticated operation that was quite impressive by our standards. So I think they're coming a long way. As in any struggle like this, things are probably going to get worse before they get better, and we're seeing that with the violence in Mexico. Not only TCO on TCO violence, but violence that is basically an outgrowth of the fact that the Calderon administration has taken such a courageous stand against these organizations. At Northcom, we do everything we can to help our partners. We have great respect for their sovereignty, and in that light, I would leave it to the Mexican authorities to disclose any of the particular details of the support that we provide. But in general, it's sharing the lessons learned that we have learned so hard over the last 10 years of similar struggles elsewhere in the world from which our Mexican partners can benefit. And I would include in that how you do planning, how you do special operations, and also how you carefully observe human rights. We have a very good partnership with our friends in Mexico, and I have great respect for their efforts, sir.
Thank you very much. Ranking Member Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have two questions. The Chairman actually covered a number of the questions that I was interested in. The first one is on actually behalf of Congresswoman Giffords. I'm trying to ask her questions, get her issues in as the ranking member here until she's able to come back. And I thank you, gentlemen, for your kind words on her behalf. She's doing much, much better, and we're all looking forward to her return. And I was down in her district last week, down at Davis-Monthan and Fort Huachuca. And she has one specific question, as I think both the SOUTHCOM and Northcom people know, and that is about the Air and Space Operations Center. The 612th is at Davis-Monthan, which is responsible, General Fraser, for the Southern Command. The 601st is in Florida and is responsible for the Northern Command, and the Air Force has made the decision, the military has made the decision to combine the two. And there are a number of questions about that. I had the opportunity to spend some time down there and visit the center they have at Davis-Monthan, and it is very impressive. It's being updated as we speak, and seems like a very capable center, and obviously they are worried about losing that in terms of how that combination is going. So a couple of questions about that. First of all, Congressman Giffords' staff has requested from the Air Force sort of an analysis of this issue. How is it going to work to combine two operations centers in that way, and what are the criteria that the Air Force and the two commands are going to be weighing to determine which one wins, if you will? She has not yet received that from the Air Force. So if you could work with perhaps both of your commands with the Air Force to get that analysis of that to her office and to mine, that would be very helpful. And then second, specific question on that, and it's for both of you actually. What are the factors that you're weighing in terms of determining what the best place to do this would be? And then also, how do you think it's going to work having two separate commands with the same operations center?
Ranking Member Smith, if I could start. It is a discussion that is still within the Air Force, and it really relies primarily within the Air Force as they are working their way through to answer many of the questions that you're asking. The capability that's resident in Air Force South is very significant. But I'm also comfortable as the Air Force works its way through this that they understand our needs. And I've had that discussion with the Chief of Staff of the Air Force as well as the Commander of Air Combatant Command. And they're working to make sure that our needs, not only when it comes time for crisis, but also as it supports our training and our exercise requirements, that they are integrating those into their matrix as they determine how best to support this command. The benefit, as I see also, though, is that Air Forces South, as the staff, will remain a part of Air Force or of Southern Command. It is not a combination completely of the two organizations, and as a result, we have a Air Force component that is focused and dedicated on continuing to build relationships with our partner Air Forces within the region. So I don't have the specific analysis either. The Air Force is still working its way through that. I still understand it will be a little bit of time before they come.
It'd be good to see that, because my concern as I was down there, and forgive me, I'm forgetting for the moment the general's name who runs the base, Lieutenant General Spears, who showed me around. They have incredible capability there. I happened to be there when the President was down in the SOUTHCOM region, so they were showing me all that was involved in planning for that, all the technology and capability that they have there. It also has some flexibility to be a center for other contingencies if those come up. So I think it is an incredible capability that we would hate to lose after having built it. And I would be very, very interested in getting the criteria. What is the Air Force weighing in terms of what they need in a joint operations center? Because that's not clear at this point how they're going to put this together. And I and my staff have some concerns that criteria that might not be the most important from an operational standpoint, but could be from a budgetary standpoint, might be given higher priority than we would like. So I'd love to see what the criteria are. Admiral Winnefeld, if you had anything to add on that.
Yes, sir. We'll work together to ask the Air Force to provide those criteria. They have their own criteria that they're using, and I don't have full visibility on those at the moment. I would say that both of those Air Operations Centers are very capable centers. The one at Tyndall Air Force Base, of course, which is the NORAD, Continental NORAD Region Operations Center, is very capable, has excess capacity, and that sort of thing as well. The things that matter the most to me are that NORAD has a daily, vibrant mission in which literally many decisions are made time-critical decisions are made on a daily basis that affect the security of this country from both external and internal threats. So in any case, whichever way the decision falls, I would want to make sure there was minimal disruption in our ability to execute those daily decisions. I would want to make, one of the things that's important to me is that my commander, whose base is there in Tyndall, is able to have rapid access to his Air Operations Center in case he needs to be the one making those split-second decisions. And I also, it's very useful for me to have the National Guard, frankly, running that Operations Center, because they bring such an extended time frame, deep experience that is embedded in that center over a course of years rather than a constant inflow and outflow of people. Having said that, I would tell you that General Fraser and I have discussed this. We're comfortable that either way this decision goes, we'll be able to manage it, and that we will work very closely together to bend over backwards to make sure that the other guy is supported, whoever absorbs the other's center.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And Congressman, if I might, I've had this similar discussion with General Schwartz as well as General Fraser, the commander of Air Force Combat Command, and I'm confident that they understand our requirements and are working very diligently to meet those requirements as they look at this design.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I will actually hold the other question that I had for the end. That took a little longer than I expected, so I will yield back to the Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Bartlett.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your long service to our country. Our founding fathers were very well acquainted with the exercise of the King's Army. And so it would be expected that they would want to preclude any such use of the Army in the new country that they were establishing. And so it's no surprise what we find in the Constitution. In Article 1, Section 8, which describes the prerogatives of the Congress, it says the Congress shall have power to declare war, to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces, to provide for calling forth the militia, to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrection, and repel invasions. And then in Section 2 of the Constitution, Article 2 of the Constitution, where they define the responsibilities of the President, there's only one brief reference to the relationship of the President to the military, and that's in Section 2 of Article 2, and it says there, the President shall be the Commander-in-Chief of the Army and the Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into the actual service of the United States. That calling into service is the prerogative of the Congress, you note, from Article 1 of the Constitution. In 1973, during the height of the Cold War, it was clear that there had to be some interpretation of the intent of our founding fathers, because the Congress clearly would not have time to be convened to declare war if we were attacked by the Soviet Union. And so our two houses drafted the War Powers Resolution. And in it, it said, the intent, it is the purpose of this joint resolution to fulfill the intent of the framers of the Constitution of the United States. I see this as kind of a recapitulation of the Constitution of the United States. But to make the intent of our founding fathers consistent with the reality of 1973, they said that the President could call our armed forces into combat under three circumstances: a declaration of war, specific statutory authorization, or three, national emergency created by attack upon the United States, its territory or possessions, or its armed forces. This third, of course, relevant to the Cold War and the threat of a bolt out of the blue that everybody quite expected could happen then. Then Section 3 of that says the President in every possible instance shall consult with Congress before introducing United States forces into hostilities or into situations where imminent involvement in hostilities is clearly indicated by the circumstances. Help me understand which of these three were invoked in committing our troops to the military, and why no time was available to consult the Congress when there was plenty of time to consult with the United Nations and the Arab League. Do we now, in fact, and this isn't the first president, by the way, this War Powers Act was passed over the veto of the President. That means that more than two-thirds of the Senate and the House, supported by their constituents, believed that this ought to become the law of the land. This isn't the first president to use the military, I think, in violation of the Constitution and of the War Powers Act. What is your understanding of which of these three circumstances, situations in the War Powers Act is relevant to our involvement in Libya?
Congressman, I have not analyzed that aspect of things, and I think, frankly, the question would be best referred to the Department of Defense and potentially to the White House. I mean, it sounds to me like it's an issue under discussion between the executive and the legislative branch. My focus, if you're referring specifically to Libya, as a U.S. combatant commander, my job was to provide forces for General Carter Ham, who is the AFRICOM commander, who then employed those forces. From a NATO perspective, I operate under a distinctly different chain of command, and the authorities would be completely different.
Appreciate your response, and thank you very much. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and gentlemen, welcome, and thank you for your service and for doing a great job in your respective positions, which at this point are vital and critical to our national security. I was on a trip with the chairman and Congressman Klein. We visited Pakistan and Afghanistan and then stopped at NATO headquarters. And for the members, I would strongly recommend that when you visit Afghanistan, you stop in NATO, because the admiral and the ambassador can really add to the visit and give you a good perspective on the critical role of NATO and the things that are going on. I don't know if you want to comment.
I would just very much echo that, and it's a very logical stopping point coming in or out of Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan. We would love to have you and have a chance to show you how the alliance is engaged in this, and I think, thank you for mentioning that, sir.
Thank you. And for General Fraser and Admiral Winfield, I just was part of a trip last week that went through, well, we went to Colombia, Panama, Guatemala, and Mexico. And I would appreciate if you would comment, and I know General Fraser, I think it was you that mentioned the triangle of concern, which includes Guatemala. If you would comment on the challenges that we're facing there. The Ambassador McFarland expressed his concern about the situation in Guatemala and the kinds of challenges that government is facing as a result of the drug trafficking organizations now using it as a staging area and a transshipment area. Panama as well is kind of the crossroads where those organizations decide which way they're going to bring narcotics into the U.S., whether the Caribbean, through Mexico, or along the Pacific. So if both of you would comment on that, I would appreciate it. I think it'd be very important to get your perspective.
Thank you, Congressman Reyes. Let me step back, if I could, for just a minute and explain the issue as I see it. And it's a very non-traditional military requirement and concern, because it's an irregular force and a transnational criminal organization. Our roles are very limited. But what we see from a cocaine standpoint, and I'll talk specifically cocaine, the majority of cocaine is still produced in the northern part of South America, the Andean Ridge. That transits up along the east and west coast of Central America and makes its first stop somewhere along that isthmus. Panama, Costa Rica, some in Nicaragua, primarily right now in Honduras, about 40% of it, and then into Guatemala. Once it arrives on land, then it continues to transit up through the isthmus of Central America into Mexico and then into the United States across the southwest border. We estimate that roughly about 60 to 65% of the cocaine that's produced transits that route. How that manifests itself within Central America then is in increasing episodes of violence. And my best way to describe that is, if we use UN-based figures, in Iraq last year, the homicide rate or violent death rate was 14 per 100,000. In Guatemala last year, it was 48 per 100,000. If you go to some specific cities, Guatemala City, it will approach 100. In Honduras, it was 77 per 100,000. In El Salvador, it was 68 per 100,000. We continue to work with Northern Command, with our partner militaries and our interagency partners, because the real solution for this is an interagency. Department of State has a Central American Region Security Initiative working not only to support our militaries, but law enforcement as well as judiciary, and bring up the capacities within those countries. And it is us all working together on a regional basis that will address that problem, and those are the efforts that we're taking on today.
I would add, sir, that you know, the complexities of that region are enormous, particularly the Mexico, Guatemala, Belize border region. And General Fraser and I work very closely on that region to understand the complexities and to look at the way ahead for addressing them. I would say that my Mexican partners are very sophisticated. They're very aware of what's happening down there. They are approaching this strategically. They know that they need to get at that problem. They have a capacity issue, for one thing. They do not have a huge military, and they have their hands full right now in the Northeast, in places like Ciudad Juarez and Monterrey, and they want to get that violence under control as best they can before they really open up another front. And I respect them for that. We are working to see if there's any way that we can help them down there. And in fact, General Fraser and I, again, work closely together in that very, very complex region.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Admirals, General, thank you for your service. I share the concerns of Chairman McKeon and Chairman Bartlett over the new war that America is in Libya. But today is budget request, but we need to address the concerns of the American people concerning Libya, I think, as soon as possible. Admiral Stavridis, there are success stories, and I appreciate you bringing up in Afghanistan that there are now 45,000 troops, largely from NATO. And I've had the privilege of meeting with troops from Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia. It's really encouraging to see this, and the American people need to know how we do have a 49-nation coalition of real troops involved from such remarkable places as Mongolia. With that in mind, could you tell us what are the contributions of the troops the American people need to know when there is success?
Thank you, sir. I'd also throw out a couple other interesting countries that are in this, Tonga, El Salvador, as well as all of our kind of traditional partners, and we're also in discussion with other nations. This really has become a global effort. In addition to the 49 countries with troops there are actually a total of well over 80 countries that are contributing financially to develop Afghanistan. In terms of what our partners are doing, the first thing I would mention is that they are taking casualties. They are in this fight. Tragically, we have lost about 1,400 of our fine young men and women in Afghanistan. We have 98,000 U.S., 45,000 allied. So 2 to 1, you would expect the Allies would have lost about 700 killed in action. The Allies have lost 900 killed in action. So they are suffering casualties at a higher rate per capita than we are here in the United States in many instances. They are also bringing very specific skills across a range of areas, and the one I would highlight for the committee today is training. If you think about how we're going to succeed in Afghanistan, I believe we will train our way to success. We're beginning a transition this summer that will run through 2014, and I believe that the ability to make that transition is dependent on effective Afghan security forces. Today there are 275,000 of them. They're being trained very much by U.S., but also by our coalition partners who bring discrete skill sets at everything ranging from orienteering to aircraft maintenance. And so this training effort, led by Lieutenant General Bill Caldwell, many of you have met with General Caldwell, is an area in which we are encouraging our allies to bring additional forces. And here I would highlight both the Canadians and the Dutch have recently increased the numbers of troops that they are going to commit to the training mission. So that would be the one I would particularly draw a line under, in addition to the work around the nation and the patrolling. Finally, in a command and control sense, although we all know General Petraeus is our commander, his deputy is British, his chief of staff is French. As you look around Afghanistan to the leaders in each of the regional command areas, Kabul is commanded by a Turk. In the far west, we see an Italian in command. In the north, we see a German in command, in addition to U.S. commanders in the south and the east. So in command and control, in casualties, in many discrete missions, I would highlight training in particular. I think the contributions of the allies are noteworthy and part of, I believe, my cautious optimism for success in Afghanistan.
And for peace in the future, American forces working together, the interoperability, people need to know how positive this is going to be. Another success I saw with Congresswoman Madeleine Bordallo was to visit the new bases of MK Air Base in Romania, Novo Selo in Bulgaria. First time in the 1,225-year history of Bulgaria that they've invited a foreign military presence. What is the status of those bases?
Both of them are part of our training programs and are very effective for us to move rotational forces to engage with not only the troops of those nations, but other troops from Eastern Europe, the Baltics, and the Balkans. So very much part of our training infrastructure in Europe, in nations that are very supportive of our missions in Afghanistan, in Europe, and in the alliance.
Thank you very much, and
Sir.
appreciate all of your service.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mrs. Davis.
Thank you, and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your service as well. Admiral Stavridis, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the concerns that we all feel in terms of our economic situation, but more particularly in terms of our European allies. Clearly, they have been affected by the economy in their countries, and so there are demands put on them. And I'm wondering if you're worried at all about NATO's readiness due to any European cutbacks or of other allies.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I would start actually with some good news, and then I'll move to the bad news. The good news is that our European allies, although they are, like the United States, going through economic challenges, they have great resources. The GDP of Europe is about $14 trillion, very similar to that of the United States. So if you put the United States GDP and Europe's GDP together, about 28 to 30 trillion dollars, which is roughly half of the global GDP. So the point is, we're lucky that our close allies in Europe live in prosperous societies who can contribute to defense. Now, the bad news is that many of our allies are not meeting the NATO standard of spending at least 2% of their GDP on defense. And so some are, the United Kingdom and France and Turkey and Greece, and a handful are, but the majority are not. So I am worried, and I believe that we here in the United States, because we pay a much higher percentage of our GDP for our defense, need to be emphatic with our European allies that they should spend at least the minimum NATO 2%. And at a military-to-military level, I carry that message often, emphatically, and very directly, frankly, not only to military counterparts, but also to political actors in each of the nations in the alliance.
Is there a concern as well that the plate is just getting too full as well for NATO?
I think that is a concern everywhere today. And again, in my view, a minimum spending goal of 2% is very reasonable, and one that, broadly speaking, the alliance should be able to support. So I will continue to press that emphatically. Secretary Gates pushes that very emphatically. Secretary Clinton pushes that very emphatically, and we are all leaning forward to make sure our allies do the right thing in this regard.
Thank you. Could you turn to a second to the potential cooperation between the U.S. and Russia and any changes that you're seeing in terms of their military modernization efforts and how that is affecting the Eucom environment, the AOR?
Yes, ma'am, I can. In terms of where we are cooperating with Russia, there's actually a wide spectrum of activities, some of which you may not generally be aware of. One is piracy. Russia is operating ships off the coast of Africa that are working very closely with NATO and European Union ships, along with those of other nations. Another area is counterterrorism. Russia has been subject to many terrible terrorist attacks, and we are cooperating with them in that regard. Counter-narcotics. Russia has a very disturbing opium and heroin addiction problem, and we are in constant dialogue with them to try and see how we can work against the trafficking of heroin in particular, which comes from Afghanistan. We are also, as we know, recently signed an arms control agreement with Russia, And then finally, I would add,
and I guess can go on to the bad news.
yeah, as always, there are going to be areas where we don't agree with Russia. The situation in Georgia is one of those, for example, where we stand for the territorial integrity of Georgia. But I think on balance, overall, certainly compared to the Cold War, and I would argue compared to 3 or 4 years ago, these zones of cooperation are in fact in place and expanding. The one we are looking to and exploring is missile defense, and that's out in the future, but it's certainly part of the dialogue today between the United States and Russia.
Thank you very much. If I could just very quickly, Admiral Winfield, on the Merida initiative, which we know is now not, well, I guess the initiative really ended in FY10, and we now have another security assistance programs in beyond Merida. How important is that assistance?
I think the Merida program is very, very important, and there's been some criticism lately that we haven't delivered fast enough, and part of that has to do with simple physics, and that is if you're going to buy a helicopter, the helicopter's on an assembly line, and it takes a while to get that helicopter built. And I would also add, though, that Secretary Gates has accelerated, by the way, the program for some of these helicopters to Mexico, which I think is a very helpful step. But helping our Mexican partners with equipment is one of many things that we would like to do with them, including sharing our experience over the last few years, the things that we've learned. But the equipment is certainly important, particularly mobility, helicopters, night vision goggles, that sort of thing is really priceless to be able to help our partners with that kind of support.
Thank you. Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your leadership and for your service. I appreciate your being here before us today and discussing these very important issues. I want to echo what Mr. Wilson has said and our chairman about concerns of the operation in Libya. It is a mission that I'm concerned as to whether or not its goals are clear. And also I'm a little concerned and believe it's unclear as to who we are supporting in this conflict. But I know that is not, as Mr. Wilson had said, the subject matter of this hearing, and we're going to continue to pursue that issue later today. But I do think it does need to be acknowledged as the concerns of this committee as we go forward. I would like to talk, Admiral Stavridis, you were talking about the issue of the drug trade, the effects of the problems in Russia. I appreciate that you and I last month had an opportunity to meet during my trip to NATO and in Brussels. I appreciate your discussions there about the drug trade. So I would like to revisit that with you. General Petraeus has indicated that 1/3 to perhaps 40% of the Taliban's funding comes from the drug trade. So intuitively, we believe that if you can reduce the drug trade, we can reduce the money that buys weapons and explosives that fund the insurgency. However, the to-do list of how we address this problem extends well beyond the Department of Defense. With your prior experience, I'd like to know, how do you believe that we are doing in going after this problem? And are we hampered by Department of Defense or NATO limitations in counter-narcotic missions? And also, General Fraser, there are differing viewpoints about whether the counter-drug strategy in the region has been successful as touted. From your perspective, what have been the successes, the challenges, and shortcomings of the regional counter-narcotics efforts? Admiral?
Thank you, sir, and thank you for your visit to NATO and for your work with the Parliamentary Assembly as well. I would start by putting some numbers on this. Afghanistan today produces about 80 to 90% of the world's poppy, which is then turned into opium and then ultimately into heroin, which is highly addictive. In Russia alone last year, 30,000 young people between the ages of 16 and 24 died of heroin overdoses. There is a significant heroin problem throughout many other nations in Europe, and it flows across to the United States. So there's a human cost to this. Secondly, as you alluded to, sir, Taliban financing comes out of this, probably $100 to $200 million. And so that funding stream goes back and directly contributes to our losses in Afghanistan. And then thirdly, all along that route, there's corruption and there's crime as the drugs move from Afghanistan through Central Asia, through the Baltic the Balkans and into the user patterns both in Russia, Europe, and ultimately in the United States. It's very similar to what I learned about cocaine in the Americas. This, of course, is heroin. What we're doing about it is to establish a counter-trafficking effort that is multi-agency, if you will, and really is there to support the DEA as they take the lead on this. But our ability to bring surveillance, to bring connectivity, to develop analysis, all of that muscularity that we have, similar to what Doug is doing at the Joint Interagency Task Force South, we are trying to do in U.S. European Command so that we can reduce these drug flows for all the reasons I just described. It's a significant challenge, but we're starting to see some impact. And in fact, in Afghanistan, where we start this supply chain and we see Afghans in the lead, but NATO supporting, we have seen a reduction in the production of poppy and therefore of opium and heroin by about 20% over the last 2 years. So we're starting down the path. In the end, in any problem like this, you have to attack the demand side as well as the supply side and the transit zone. There's no silver bullet. You kind of have to go at all three of those, and we're attacking all three in an interagency way.
Congressman, my discussion is very similar as you look at Latin America and the effort that we've had ongoing over a number of years to address the counter-drug issue. We've kind of grown that into a counter-illicit activity issue because we find they all are interrelated. It's drugs, it's weapons, it's finance, bulk cash, all those flowing back and forth. We focus very significantly on Colombia, primarily because there was a terrorist issue there also with the FARC, and it's now become a narco-terrorist issue as they've now used narco-terrorism or narco capability to finance their capacity. But if you look at Colombia today, where Colombia was 10 years ago, largely on the shoulders of the Colombians, there has been significant progress there. Homicides are down almost 50%. Kidnappings are down 90%. They are largely controlling their entire country where there were pockets where they were not before. The aviation capacity that used to emanate out of Colombia into the United States has been removed. They've shifted other places. And if you look at the effort combined with Jihad of South of working in the transit zones along with our law enforcement partners who work with law enforcement throughout the region, the impact in the United States over the last 10 years is the price of cocaine has gone up 75%. The purity has gone down 30%. There is still a big demand problem in the United States, and it kills 38,000 people a year. It's an issue we need to address. What have we not done?
If you have more, would you please get it to him?
Yes, sir.
On the record, we're a little over time there. Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, for Admiral Winnefeld, I'm going to look north a little bit here. Last year, the Olympics was held in Vancouver, and Northcom participated in Olympic Coordination Center activities for security issues. And I was curious, what operational lessons has Northcom taken from that? And how are you continuing to support these northern border enforcement activities? Note in your testimony, you said 22% of available resources out of Joint Task Force North are devoted to the northern border. Can you talk about quickly, because I got a few other questions about those lessons. And then within the restrictions of your Title 10, how are you continuing to support northern border enforcement?
Your first question, as far as the Olympics, I think we took a lot of good, solid lessons out of that, and I'd be happy to provide some of those for the record. I think most importantly was just the close cooperation that we have between U.S. Northern Command and Canada Command. My partner, Walt Semyonov, up there, and I are very close. We have a Canadian-U.S. civil assistance plan where U.S. military is able to support Canadian military and vice versa under the imprimatur of our two State Department and their Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So that was a very good news story. and it's really brought out lessons that we could potentially use in a future disaster, either in support of Canada or the U.S., so very positive. In terms of the northern border, 4,000 miles of very difficult territory. We do, since 2008, we've provided about 2 events per year that are about 30 days per event. I think we've spent around $1.8 million or $1.4 million over the last few years on that. I would candidly tell you that in that time, we've managed to assist in the apprehension of 181 pounds of marijuana, which is about the same amount that a ultralight drops in any given night coming across the southern border. At the same time, JTF North has done exceptional work on the southern border. I think in a 2-month period from November through January, they assisted in the apprehension of around 17,000 pounds of marijuana and assisted in the apprehension of the suspects that killed Agent Terry on our side of the border. So we have to consider this as an investment strategy. We do continue to support our interagency partners on the northern border with radar, ground sensors, and that sort of thing, and we'll continue to do so.
Yeah, and I understand the balance that you have to meet. It's clearly from the testimony and from questions here, the issues on the southern border are much more difficult. But we live, we live where we live, and certainly want to just, to the extent that you can continue supporting that cooperation, I appreciate it. But your testimony also covered the Arctic, and I was curious what you would do differently than U.S. Coast Guard, and what would you share with U.S. Coast Guard? I also note in your testimony your commander's estimate isn't done, it sounds like, for the Arctic. Can you tell us where you are in that, when we can expect something?
We're working very hard on a commander's estimate. It's really good progress. I really benefit, by the way, inside my command by having 125 Canadians there with an integrated staff. It not only allows me to benefit from their expertise in the Arctic, which is considerable, but it also enables me to have true transparency with my Canadian partners in that regard, so there's no suspicion going back and forth. So we're making great progress on that. We've pretty much settled on the primary themes being defense, security, and safety, with international cooperation to peacefully open the Arctic, to assist in that as best we can without militarizing the Arctic. I also have a partner at the other end of the table in U.S. European Command who's got a vested interest in things in the Arctic going well as well. One of the interesting things that we will be approaching within our own process is the notion of working cooperatively with Canada so that we can ensure that the capabilities that we may invest in as the Arctic opens up are done in a complementary fashion rather than a redundant fashion, so that we can both be more efficient. And I think that's a good news story. If we can carry that ball down the field, it would be very helpful. And then in terms of our own internal U.S. military sorts of things, we work closely with the Coast Guard, and we work with the various services, in particular the Navy, who's been had a very good positive effort in progress to study what the future needs are for the Navy in the Arctic. And I think we've got some work ahead of us, frankly, on what kind of capabilities we're going to need, but I think we have a good understanding of the gaps and capability that will become apparent as the Arctic opens.
Yeah, and I think the reason I bring that up is because obviously the Coast Guard does as well, has a good understanding of the gaps and the extent that we're not being redundant within our own services, among our own services, but rather investing together. I think it'll be better for the taxpayers. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Franks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you for being here. Admiral Winfield, I am concerned about the effects of budget constraints on the GMD program. First of all, the 2011 budget requests reduced GMD funding by about $185 million from the FY 2011 for a total of about $1.16 billion, which is obviously designed to sustain the 30 GBIs that we have in Alaska and California, as well as the other GMD programs. And I guess the first part of the question is, are 30 GBIs enough, or is it time to reassess supply given the potential need to do some additional testing? And I also understand that current 2011 budgets left the GMD program with operating with a budget that's really $324 million less than was anticipated for 2011. And part of that, I'm sure, is the CRA and some of the other challenges that you're dealing with, and I apologize for that on behalf of the Congress. And I know that there's some recent flight intercept test failures, and that are adding to the challenge. And I guess I just want to make sure that we know that you have enough funds to successfully implement an effective GMD that will not fail when the rubber hits the road.
Thank you, sir, for that question. It's first of all, the funds, of course, go to the Missile Defense Agency, and I'm the operator of that system, the trigger puller, if you will. But it goes without saying that I would pay very close attention to the health and future of the ballistic missile defense system that we have. Regarding the budget, I would say that my very good partner, General O'Reilly at Missile Defense Agency, I believe he would say that most of those funding reductions are based on efficiencies, and that it's just good work on the part of his internal staff to try to squeeze as much out of that program.
I just met with him, and so that's why part of the reason for the question. So,
right. I would say that the 12 budget is going to do some very important things for me. One, it's going to procure some additional radars, the AN-TPY-2 radars that will give us more situational awareness forward. It will provide an East Coast communications node for us that will increase the accuracy of our missiles, and it's going to keep the GBI line open, which I think is very important to me because it gives us more options for the future as we study these. I would also add that there's a good, robust intellectual effort going on within the Office of the Secretary of Defense, led by the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, that's bringing all the players together to look at what the future holds in case the threat starts to accelerate a little bit, and we're aware of the potential for that happening. And I'm pleased with what I've seen in that effort. I believe it's soon going to be briefed to the Secretary of Defense, and that subsequent to that the Congress would be briefed as well. But I'm comfortable in my ability to defend the country from the current limited ballistic missile threats that I'm charged with defending against. I would echo your comments on the CRA. That has some definite potential for slowing things down for General O'Reilly, to include delays in component testing, delays in Navy ballistic missile defense ship modernization. It delays some of the testing that we'd like to do. It will delay the construction of Missile Field 2 in Fort Greely, and so on down the line. So if we can get beyond the CRs, I would be with you in that regard.
Thank you, sir. Well, let me, General Fraser, forgive me, I'm going to skip over here and talk to Admiral Stavridis, if I could. Recent evidence, Admiral, has emerged that the Iranian regime has released a video that suggests that they may escalate hostilities in an effort to fulfill this prophecy of Mahdi, and that includes, of course, destroying Israel and conquering Jerusalem. And I understand that the X-band missile defense radar system there in Israel now is obviously interconnected with our U.S. theater missile defenses, and that we have fire control. But I'm concerned that the budget constraints will prevent these systems from effectively mitigating an Iranian threat to the region. So I guess the question here is, how confident are you that our current missile defense network in that region can effectively mitigate an Iranian threat that seems to be increasing or even escalating? And what do you believe needs to be done additionally to ensure that we can protect key U.S. interests, including the State of Israel, from such a threat?
Sir, I do believe that as we look at the emerging ballistic missile threat from Iran and from other actors, both in that region and elsewhere around the world, it's a threat for which we must be very mindful. The cooperation we have with Israel in that regard is strong, and I believe it will continue. I had a chance to go see a missile defense exercise a year ago. I'm going to another one this summer. It's a capability we work very closely on. The good news is we're now bringing online, as you know, European phased adaptive approach, and I will send you some material for the record that will cover that part of my answer. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Hanabusa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to begin with Admiral Winfield. In reading your testimony, I was taken by the reference to the National Guard. In our readiness subcommittee, we had talked about the National Guards sort of enhancing the forces when we get to the end strength issues. You specifically mentioned that you have 40 as part of your organ, the U.S. Northcom. And I'm also curious, given the fact that we have the issues of course, Article 10 and Title 32, how is it that you're able to do that? Because they're being utilized, or appear to be utilized, for issues regarding really our own defense. And there's, of course, as you know, through the Constitution and various other laws, that there's restrictions on what the military can do. So if you can explain to me, because this is something that I've been very curious about as we talked about it in readiness, as to how do we get the National Guards working with the military. And it's also interesting because, you know, you're Navy, and of course you don't really have any of that, and they're under the control of the governors and not the Congress of the military. So if you could educate me on that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. First of all, I want to stress that I'm just very, very pleased with the relationship that I have with the National Guard, both personally with my counterpart, General Craig McKinley, and the adjutants general of the 54 states and territories and Washington, D.C. They're good friends. We're very close partners, and I think it's a very good news story. I'm also very pleased and proud with the dependence that I have on the National Guard for things that may surprise you. My missile defense trigger pullers are all National Guardsmen from Colorado or Alaska. Tremendous capability in the air sovereignty alert piece with the Air Guard, and it goes on and on. So it's important that I have National Guard representation in my headquarters, both culturally, technically, so we properly understand our relationship with the Guard and don't stray outside the lines for how we use them. And the Guardsmen that are in my headquarters tend to be on Title 10, ADOS, that sort of thing. And so we obviously have a raft of lawyers that make sure we're doing this properly and legally and that sort of thing, and that they are associated in general with National Guard-related issues, which is where the legality comes in. So, and I not only have, I think it's 45 of them in my headquarters, but on any given day, temporarily coming to the headquarters to do work or that sort of thing, I might have upwards of 100. And I'm very proud of that fact. It's really helped our headquarters in our understanding of our missions, many missions we have, and in particular, the way that we would support the states in the wake of a disaster working through FEMA. So I think it's a very good news story.
Well, as an attorney, I've never heard of attorneys playing a critical role to keep people on.
We have 10,000 of them in the Department of Defense.
Along the same lines, Admiral, you also mentioned the concept of transnational criminal organizations as a major focus, and I guess that's also triggered the interest in the National Guard component as well, because you know, we don't usually traditionally view the military as somebody engaging in transnational criminal or TCOs, as you say. Can you also explain to me how that's interfacing with the National Guard, if it does at all? Because that seems to be more of a local state issue than a military one.
Sure, that's a very good question. And in general, first I would say that anything that we do regarding transnational criminal organizations, whether it be domestically or in support of our Mexican partners, is always in support of civilian agencies, in particular law enforcement. We don't take on any of those roles ourselves. On the U.S. side of the border, we give considerable support on the active duty side using JTF North to our law enforcement partners, in particular Customs and Border Protection and ICE and those sorts of things. When it comes to the National Guard, and the recent deployment of National Guard to the border, that's completely outside of my responsibility, in the sense that they're brought into Title 32 active status. They work for the state governors in that status, and by virtue of the fact that they're in Title 32, technically they can do law enforcement operations, although I don't believe they are. They're typically doing entry identification team support to the Border Patrol and that sort of thing. So I have no command and control authority whatsoever over the National Guardsmen who have been sent to the border. I watch it, of course. I keep in touch with my Guard partners and how it's going.
But they are an integral part of your TCO operation.
The National Guardsmen who are deployed to the borders are not part of my counter-TCO operations. They really work for the state governors and in turn work closely with the Customs and Border Protection team.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all three of you for your service to our country. Admiral Stavridis, if I'm saying it right, the Government Accounting Office has criticized Eucom, European Command, and U.S. Army Europe for its cost assessments regarding options for retaining 4 brigade combat teams in Europe, saying the analysis were quote-unquote poorly documented, limited in scope, and based on questionable assumptions, unquote. What have you done to correct this problem? Do you agree with the GAO? Will retention of 3 or 4 brigade combat teams in Europe add significant infrastructure sustainment costs? And what are the cost implications?
Well, this is an area in which there's been a great deal of analysis going both ways. And I would say that, first of all, I'll provide you, because it's detailed and technical, I'd like to come back to you on the record and provide that in some measured way to you. As a general proposition, I think over the last year we have become much closer in the way we viewed this as between Department of Army, Eucom, GAO, and OSD, because OSD has really stepped up and led the study that the Chairman asked me about earlier. So as the results of that study come out, I think you'll have an opportunity to see that we have brought this analysis together in a way that's sensible. The root of the question is always, do you save money or do you spend more money when you forward deploy troops from CONUS or from a forward European command platform, if you will? And so there's been some back and forth between the entities you mentioned, Congressman, in regard to everything from cost of shipping to moving from, we would say, from fort to port and port to fort and port forward. So I would say over the last year we've brought that analysis together, and it's reflected in the report that will come out shortly, and I will get you more of the technical detail and provide it to you.
Let me ask a quick follow-up question in regard to that. If forces based in Europe are not committed to combat operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, in your opinion, how many brigade combat teams should be forward based in Europe?
Well, I think that it's difficult to answer that question, and I would point here to the Libya operation in the sense of we never know what's going to pop up. And obviously we're not sending ground troops to Libya. That's very clear. However, it's indicative of the potential for emergence of new tasking. So the analysis that we have provided to the Department of Defense reflects the potential for change in the world. And the change can be good as we transition in Afghanistan and reduce it, and the change potentially can be bad if we see an emergent mission somewhere.
And do you believe that the operation right now in Libya has the appropriate force mix between U.S. and coalition forces?
I do. And I would say that we today in NATO took over the mission, and we are reducing the U.S. component of it measurably, and I think you'll see our allies increasingly engaged, and that's appropriate. And the mix of forces are sea and air forces, since we're not going to use ground troops there. And certainly that's good in the sense that it's different than the forces that we need in Afghanistan, a landlocked country. So I believe we're adequately resourced at the moment at NATO, and I believe that the balance between U.S. and coalition is appropriate.
Let me just say one word for the record that the President said in his speech, I think on Monday night, that it took 8 years to do regime change in Iraq. Actually, it took 3 weeks to do regime change in Iraq. It took 8 years in the aftermath of that regime change, given the fact that there was then a humanitarian catastrophe and sectarian warfare that dragged the U.S. Into it for 8 years. General Fraser, could you speak a little bit about China and its growing influence in Latin America?
Thank you, Congressman. Today I see it primarily in the diplomatic and the commercial realm, really in a two-way street, if you will. Many of the countries and nations within Latin America and the Caribbean are reaching out to China as they see that as an economic opportunity for them, as well as China coming in and working within Latin America. Outside of Asia, Latin America is the second destination for Chinese investment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Bordallo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Admiral Winfield. Actually, I would like to make a statement, and I want to thank my colleague from Hawaii for bringing up the National Guard. We're indeed very proud of our National Guard in Guam, and I think if my statistics are right, that per capita we have the largest number of National Guardsmen in the United States. Is that correct?
That's a very good question because Guam lies outside of my area of responsibility. I have not paid attention, but I will certainly look into that.
Well, Congressman Wilson was with me when we heard those statistics. Also, having just returned from a CODEL with Congressman Wilson and other members of the Armed Services Committee, we were shocked during a country briefing to hear that over 1 million people are addicted to drugs in Afghanistan. Is that a figure you've heard?
I can take that question. Yes, ma'am. That's accurate. I'll give you another one. In Russia today, there are 1.5 million people addicted to heroin. So this is part of this supply chain of poppy to opium to heroin that is moving largely from Afghanistan through the region and contributing to deleterious effects in corruption and human cost, as you allude to, a very great challenge.
Well, we were truly shocked at some of the numbers that we heard. Also, Admiral, I'd like to ask you, you've often discussed the most effective method to national security is a whole-of-government approach. You mentioned your efforts in great detail in your posture statement. Would you please describe to us what you have learned from this approach, and if you still believe that this is the best path forward?
I do believe in this very turbulent 21st century that we need to bring all elements of national capability together to solve security challenges, because so many of them are transnational, non-traditional problems that direct military activity will not solve. We have to have Department of State, AID, and Defense, the so-called 3 Ds, working together: defense, diplomacy, and development. And I believe it's actually much larger than those 3 agencies. We've talked a lot today about many other government agencies, from the Drug Enforcement Administration to the FAA to the Department of Justice, Department of Transportation, Department of Homeland Security, obviously. We have to bring all of these elements of capability together to bear against the challenges that we've all talked about today, because they go across borders, they're non-traditional, and I believe that is a very important aspect of our security going forward.
Well, I think my colleagues would agree with me. During our recent CODEL, we did find that working together, all of these agencies were very important to our success.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and I yield back my time.
Thank you. Mr. West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, and gentlemen. It really is an honor to have you all here today. And to Admiral Stavridis, understand that we have transitioned the combat theater of operations to NATO control right now. My question is this, and having been on some NATO missions, I know that lots of times that CJMD, the Combined Joint Manning Document, lots of times has to be picked up ad hoc to be filled. So my question is, what percentage of the CJMD are we finding that the United States is going to have to fill with the NATO C2?
Couple of answers to that, and first, Congressman, thank you for your service as well.
Not a problem.
And obviously, I've spent some time in NATO. I would say that let's start with the command structure itself. Today, the command elements are in Italian CAOC, an Air Operations Center, and Poggio Renatica, commanded by an Italian 1-star. There's a 3-star Italian admiral who's in charge of the arms embargo at Maritime Component Command Naples. In Izmir, Turkey, the Air Component Command Center, headed by a 3-star American with a 3-star French deputy, and that flows up to the 3-star Canadian general who is heading up the Joint Task Force embedded in Joint Forces Command Naples. Of that command structure, to pick one number, for example, but it's an important one, would be flag and general officers. In all of those entities, there are about 40 admirals and generals. Only 5 will be from the United States. The rest will be alliance officers. Throughout the operation, I think the balance will be somewhere around 50-50 as we move forward. Over the last week or so, taking strike sorties and as an example, they've been balanced about 50-50 between the alliance and the United States. And then finally, to take a third example, I think that we will see over the next couple of weeks as we move into this, we'll see the strike part of this, and the aviation combat air patrol will be filled largely by the allies, and the United States will shift to enablers, things like intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, refueling, CSAR, combat search and rescue. So I think the balance feels about right in terms of alliance, and I'm confident that we will be able to fill the CJMD, CJSOAR appropriately as we go forward.
Have you found yourself having to switch hats back and forth to task yourself as the Eucom commander to?
It's actually no, because the big change over the last 5 years was the stand-up of U.S. Africa Command. As you very well recall, Africa and Europe used to be part of one enormous combatant command, and I think the Department very wisely, with the support of Congress, stood up Africa Command. So it really has been a transition from a U.S. commander, Carter Ham, General Carter Ham, over to me as the NATO commander, and that's in progress today.
Very well. To General Fraser and Admiral Winfield, first of all, thanks. It's great to see both of you again. And General Fraser, it was great that your staff hosted me down there at your headquarters, a very beautiful, pristine headquarters and a very functional headquarters. One of the concerns I have, as we have discussed before, with the TCOs, but we also do have a radical Islamic threat that we are starting to see Central America, South America, and even creeping into Mexico. We discussed while we were at your headquarters these new mini-submersibles that we're starting to see. Of course, today those mini-submersibles could be used by the TCOs for drugs, but what could it possibly be used for in the future? When I go to the Border Patrol website, I see this category called OTMs, which stands for Other Than Mexicans, and I'm sure every one of us know who fits into that category. So my big concern is, are we starting to see the age-old maxim of the enemy of my enemy is my friend? Is there an alliance that is somewhat growing in your two respective AORs between these TCOs and some of these radical Islamic non-state, non-uniform belligerents, and how are we tracking it?
Congressman, thank you for that question. There is a lot of complexity to the relations of the TCOs within the region. And even though extremist organizations are involved in illicit activity, I have not seen a connection between those two groups as they conduct their own illicit activities. The one connection that we see growing is the area we term special interest aliens, and those are individuals coming from other parts outside of Latin America who have and use the illicit trafficking routes within Latin America for entry into the United States. We're just seeing connections there. That's not necessarily connected to extremist organizations, but we continue to watch.
Thank you.
If you could give it to him for the record, that'd be appreciated.
Mr.
Thornberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Stavridis, I wanted to follow up on a couple of things that you've touched on. The Chairman began by asking about force structure in Europe and the study that's going on. But I think a lot of us here at home questions about why do we have so many military folks still in Europe? And you touched briefly on the cost aspect of this, but can you discuss a little bit the operational advantages to having forces deployed in Europe should they be needed in a Libya-like situation or elsewhere in the Middle East or North Africa? How big a deal is that to have those forces that far in advance?
Sir, I think it's a very important advantage having our forces forward in Europe. And as I mentioned, we've come down a long way since the Cold War, appropriately from 400,000 down to about 80,000 today. Those 80,000, I think, contribute in at least three very distinct and obvious ways. You touched on the first, which is geography. I think that as we look forward into this turbulent 21st century, I think the possibility of continuing U.S. engagement forward in the region in which we're involved today is fairly high. And as a result, having forces that are forward gives us geographic immediacy in terms of response. And with Libya, for example, the U.S. Air Force, which is still very strong in Europe, had jets, helicopters, refuelers, all based there that could immediately be chopped to Africa Command and be on station. So I think that first advantage of geography is very crucial. A second one is that interaction of our troops with all of the European partners where we learn from each other. And I think that's an advantage that we tend to overlook at times, but being able to operate so frequently together in so many different places in and around Europe, including our crown jewel training range, Hohenfels and Grafenwehr in Germany, as well as the new bases in the East, is a second real advantage of that kind of continuous engagement. And then thirdly, the presence of the United States there is what encourages our allies to come forward and operate with us. Because we operate with them, we live with them, it creates an environment in which we can generate 45,000 non-U.S. troops for Afghanistan. We can generate today, for example, off of Libya, there are 40 ships operating, only about 12 from the United States, the rest from our European allies. Why is that? Because we are embedded with them and operate with them. So I would say geography, mutual training and the benefits of that, and finally the ability to leverage these forces forward are three very strong advantages.
Let me ask you about one other thing. You mentioned today NATO takes over the Libyan operation. Are the rules of engagement clear? I think we all assume that if an airplane gets up in the sky, a Libyan airplane, it will be shot down. If a tank moves, it seems like the tank is taken out. But it's not clear to me if there are a group of Libyan government soldiers massing together, or what our reaction is to that. And so I guess my question is, are the rules of engagement clear? What can you tell us about them? And in a NATO context, are they determined by the least common denominator, or who sets them?
Terrific question. I think we should probably not discuss specifics of rules of engagement because of classification. I will provide you the actual rules of engagement, and I think you'll be struck as you see them how similar they are to U.S. normal unilateral rules of engagement in format, in style, and in fact in intent, in use of terminology, everywhere from hostile act to hostile intent to penetration of technical area, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this goes back to your previous question of an advantage. We've worked together so long with these allies that we are fairly close in our tactics, techniques, procedures, and yes, our rules of engagement. In terms of how they're generated, they come up from the operators. The first set of rules of engagement were generated from the operational commander who is heading this operation down in Naples. They come into my headquarters. They're very carefully vetted by my operational international NATO team, and then they go up to the North Atlantic Council and they're approved there. All that flowed very smoothly in this process.
Thank you. Mr. Gibson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the distinguished panelists for being here and also for your leadership for our servicemen and women. I guess first a comment, and it's conveyed with the deepest and most profound respect for my colleagues and the panelists. But, you know, on the issue of the forward presence and some of the virtues that have been put forward today, I guess it would be precisely my point that I'm concerned about us being forever or aggressively being involved in operations overseas. I have opposed the actions in Libya. I think we have so much on the plate right now that we need to do to bring to closure. With regard to Iraq and Afghanistan, we're certainly involved in a global challenge from extremist networks that are designed to protect our cherished way of life. And as we bring those operations in Iraq and Afghanistan to a closure and look to perfect and to neutralize, perfect our counter-terrorist operations and neutralize the extremist threats and learn from the past, I don't want to see us get involved as much as I'm empathetic with those who want to live free. So I guess I would respectfully disagree that we get added benefit from forward presence, and would ask that we consider the fact that while these are worthy goals, reassurance, deterrence,
training and engaging in operations. I'm not convinced that must be so with forward presence. I think you can also do these things using exercises, joint exercises going forward. Just wanted to make that comment. The question I have is actually for Admiral Winfield, and I must say right up front that I'm critical of some of the expansions of in our Federal Government over the last decade as it relates to protecting our way of life. I just wanted to say that up front because I'm going to ask you the question with regard to whole of government, Department of Defense, Northern Command, and Department of Homeland Security. Can you perhaps provide some clarity on unity of effort, who's in charge with regard to border security, counter-terrorist operations here, cyber defense, and response to natural disaster? Who's in charge?
Thank you for your question, sir. First, I would say that we have a very good whole-of-government synergistic relationship with our various partners inside the Federal Government, to include Department of Homeland Security and also inside DOD. In general, I find myself, unless I'm pulling the trigger for a ballistic missile defense or some sort of air-breathing threat to North America, that most of what I do is in support of my partners. So in the event of a disaster, for example, there are capabilities that the Department of Defense can bring to bear that we would use other places as well, potentially overseas in a contingency or something like that, that are either very specific capabilities that are in short supply among our partners inside government, or their capacities, just sheer numbers of people that can respond to a disaster who are well-trained, disciplined, as your experience in the military would probably inform you, where we can assist our partners. And we have very carefully drawn rules and limitations and processes and procedures by which we provide that support. So my very good partner in the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Craig Fugate, is in the lead in the Federal response to a disaster in support of the various states. If he needs my support, there's a process in place, the Stafford Act, Economy Act, and where he can provide a mission assignment to me, and we will respond according to the Secretary of Defense's willingness to do that. So that's just one small example. Regarding the cyber piece, I'd of course defer to Strategic Command and U.S. Cyber Command in that regard, but they've struck a very good relationship with Department of Homeland Security in terms of what the way ahead is for supporting this country in the event of a cyber attack that could be fairly debilitating. So I would want to assure you that we do have minimal redundancies, that we have appropriate procedures and rules in place where we can work closely together as a whole of government.
And appreciate the comments, and know that every day you're giving everything you have to protect us, and we're just incredibly proud. I would just say that I think that there were other ways that we could have aligned our organizations that I think would have been more effective. But for now, I'll just yield back. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Conaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you. General Fraser, you mentioned earlier with respect to Mr. Kaufman's comments relative to China's activities in Venezuela, and clearly the numbers show that it's commercial, but in your statements you talk about some military arms sales to Venezuela, Russian manned portable weapons, automatic weapons, the AK-47 deal they made with Chavez, and also, I guess, sales to Bolivia. Can you talk to us somewhat about our visibility as to what Chavez is doing with respect to those relationships, fold into that the Iranian work and the Russian work with Chavez in terms of at least talking about a nuclear power program within Venezuela and how that might morph into something else that's a little more threatening to us than just his bluster. Interesting comment he made the other day about wanting, I guess, Venezuelans to eat less every day or reduce their caloric intake. I didn't realize that was a strategic threat to Venezuela, but maybe it is. To talk about how give me some thoughts about the military aspects of what China and Russia are doing in Venezuela and South America in general.
Thank you very much for that question, Congressman. If I look broadly across the region and look at China, it is very much focused on commercial and diplomatic efforts. They do have military programs, not just with Venezuela, but with many of the countries in the region where they're inviting individuals to come attend courses within China. They're also looking to establish closer military-to-military relationships with partners in the region, and they are beginning to sell more weapons. The K-8, it's a light attack aircraft and a trainer that they're selling to Venezuela and that Bolivia is also looking at right now. I still see it very much in a commercial and diplomatic and in a business aspect. Russia, I still see, again, very much focused in arms and also working to address both commercial and diplomatic efforts. Do we have a lot of visibility? I don't have a lot of visibility into what all those agreements are. I see a number of agreements made. Those agreements tend to take a long time to come to fruition, specifically to your question on Iran and the issue with nuclear power. There was an agreement that Venezuela and Iran signed, but subsequent to the concerns in Japan over the Fukushima reactor site, at least the statements from President Chavez are that he has put a hold on any future development of nuclear power.
We've had a change in presidency in Colombia. You mentioned the great work the Colombians did, led by their courageous president, Uribe. Manuel Santos, do you see any changes in their focus on what successes Colombians had with Plan Colombia and our involvement with the new Santos-led government?
I see President Santos continuing the great work that President Uribe did and expanding it. He has reestablished diplomatic relations with Venezuela as well as Ecuador, and there are growing military as well as commercial and other relationships there across all his borders. He is working to expand that. As you look within Colombia itself, beyond Plan Colombia, it's now a consolidation plan, and he's even looking to put in place a broader plan, a $240 billion effort over 4 years to expand the Colombian government's presence throughout the region. In addition to that, he is reaching out beyond Colombia. He is helping support Mexican military with training some helicopters. Pilots. He's involved in Central America. He is looking to see where they can provide their lessons to other partners and share their experience. Okay. So it's a very positive effort.
The requirements on 22 of your statement, you talk about the needs that you have. Specific needs include manned and unmanned aerial vehicles, light detection, ranging technology, a variety of things. Does the 2012 budget request support acquisition of these capabilities for Southern Command?
These are capabilities that are existent broadly across the Department of Defense. So they are continuing to progress and provide those capabilities. And then we will work on a year-to-year basis on where the concerns and where the priorities are within the department to
So the your 2012 budget request gives you access. I mean, these aren't new, but they give you the proper access to deploy these things in your AOR adequately.
As we look across the globe and you look at all the concerns that we have around the globe, within the priorities and within the concerns that we have, I have adequate access to those types of capability. Is there opportunity for more? Yes, sir. Okay. But if we put it in context, I'm comfortable with where we are.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Admiral Stavridis, General Fraser, Admiral Winnefeld. Thank you, each of you, for the job you're doing. Please convey our thanks as a member of the Armed Services Committee. All of us, I'm sure, would ask you to convey our thanks to those that you command for the great job that they're doing. And thank you for your time here today. This committee will now be adjourned.
Thank you, Chairman.